What's up, narrators? This is Mo, and we're back with the Narratives Per Possession podcast, where we connect you to better basketball narratives. I am excited to be back again for another podcast episode. Tonight, we're talking about the Washington Wizards, and I'm excited to talk about this team because I feel like there's so many different angles that are like in the current zeitgeist of the NBA right now to discuss. We're not that far removed from the NBA trade deadline. They made some big moves at the trade deadline. Everybody's favorite topic by far besides that is tanking. Everybody's in tanks. We want to talk so much about tanking. And because of the standing of where the Washington Wizards are in the NBA Eastern Conference right now, I mean, they're a poster child unintentionally, I feel like, or perhaps even unfairly about the tanking conversation because, I mean, they're doing what they're doing. And I have as my guest tonight, he is the co-host of Locked On Wizards, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Please subscribe to them. Check out all the great content, and they're having, like I just listened to an episode today, great episodes. Without further ado, I want to bring to the stage Ben Strober. Ben, how are you doing this evening, sir?
Good. What's going on? Happy to be on here. Thanks for bringing me on, Mo.
Absolutely, my pleasure. The Wizards, like even before, like we start chatting and getting ready for this episode, I have to say, like I have been intrigued by what the Wizards have been doing for really the better part of almost the last calendar year, because going back to the last offseason, it's I think anybody's really paying attention to this franchise right now, they're seeing some nuanced, subtle kind of ways of like this organization moving differently than perhaps they've traditionally moved over, really like multiple generations of NBA basketball. I mean, I leave it to you to tell me, like, before what we're witnessing, when was the last time the Wizards were really doing things like acquiring draft capital or not like giving out bad contracts? It just seems like it is a transformation happening right now with the Wizards.
It's completely different, and I think you can pretty easily tell who pays attention to what the Wizards have done over the last couple of years and who doesn't, because there's definitely a lot of media personalities, a lot of people that even cover the NBA that are pretty unaware or just ignorant of what the Wizards have done over the past couple of years. Essentially, they've turned a situation that was muddled in mediocrity for quite a long time under multiple different front offices, at first led by Ernie Grunfeld, and then the guy that worked right under him took over when he was relieved of his duties, Tommy Shepard. They kind of established this whole idea here in D.C., and ownership was a part of the problem as well for many years, that it was okay to be mediocre if you were a borderline playoff team year after year. There was a lot of false hope. There was a lot of selling number one players that weren't number one players, i.e. Bradley Beal, who ended up getting a really bad contract from this franchise and then a no trade clause on top of that, which made him pretty much an unmovable asset for a long time. So then you bring on this new era of monumental basketball, they call it now, led by Will Dawkins, the general manager, and the president of Monumental Basketball, Michael Winger. He's the guy that does all the trades behind the scenes, by the way. And essentially, they deconstruct this thing from the ground up over the first couple of years or so. And now, since they traded for Anthony Davis, they mark that as, this is what they publicly said, is the end of their deconstruction phase. So we're about nearly 3 years into the process. They've essentially turned Bradley Beal into Trae Young, and then Kyle Kuzma eventually became Anthony Davis. You might ask, how is this possible? It took years to do so because it acquired strong foresight and asset management from this front office. And a lot of losing has been part of the process. It was intentional. It was a welcome result. And we'll definitely talk a lot about what that pertains to in the NBA right now and the conversations that surround that. But it necessarily wasn't always about losing for the Wizards. It was about asset management, and that was kind of just part of the process. And because they've been able to take in bad contracts, acquire assets in return, move assets for other ones, they've ended up in this position where you start to really feel like you have a young core of players that you've drafted over the last couple of seasons here. You've drafted now 6 different players in the first round over the last 3 seasons. You feel like you're starting to build your core of players, and now you've supplemented here with Trae Young and Anthony Davis, not because you feel like these guys are going to win you a title, but they want to take that next step in their rebuild and help these young players they have start to feel what comes with playing more competitive basketball, the nature that requires or what it takes to win in the NBA. That's the next step for the Wizards. It's a long and painful process, and I don't think a lot of fans were necessarily up for it in the beginning, but I think a lot of Wizards fans, like me included, were begging for them to finally tear everything down and take this approach. And hopefully, you're starting to get out on the other side here soon.
Yeah, I mean, it if nothing else, it brings a different lens to the franchise, right? You go and get two like star level names, to what degree of star you consider them still at this stage of the career. They're names, they're bringing a spotlight to this franchise that just hasn't had a spotlight for many years. So it's interesting in that regard, definitely, that you see the Wizards, you know, I like that transition, to be honest, like being intentional that like we were deconstructing for a period of time and now we're starting to construct something. And at least like you could, I think at worst case, Anthony Davis and Trae Young are certainly bridges to like what that more like stable, mature build is for the organization.
That's what it seems like to me. Because how much can you rely on Anthony Davis at 32 to be healthy for an entire season? I think a lot of Wizards fans will scream about that. The people that weren't in favor of the trade saying this guy's 32, he hasn't been able to stay healthy, he hadn't been able to play in 5 straight games since he was traded to Dallas. But at the end of the day, in the situation, same thing with Young, but Young is 27 years old, so maybe there's more of an argument about where he fits long term. But for a guy like Davis, who has a player option after next season for $62 million, as long as the Wizards don't choose to extend him, you're basically committed to a year or 2 years of it, which I think is a good step for where you want to be in your rebuild towards taking the next step, trying to compete a little bit more. And then you don't have to, mortgage anything to sacrifice, a long-term future with the guy. And you also gave up nothing to get him. You gave up pretty much a glorified second-round pick that wasn't one of your own from OKC, and then a 2030 first-round pick, which will be later in there as well, which was also via Golden State. So Washington was able to maintain its entire young nucleus of players with also coupled not giving up any of its own assets, which I think is what makes this trade really tantalizing for the average NBA fan. You go, well, they just got Anthony Davis in this deal, and they didn't give up a lot in terms of actual assets to get him. Because I don't know if people forgot already, but around 54 weeks ago, Anthony Davis was technically part of the trade for a top 5 player in the world right now.
Yes.
And whether the trade was obviously a terrible, awful trade, but still, like that was the guy that was the headliner coming back from that trade.
It was. It's easily one of the most wild trades, I would argue, in all of sports history. I just can't think of
I
many
agree.
sports trades that are more insane than that Luka for AD trade. Um, and you could also put this point of view, I believe, on that trade deadline is, I mean, one of the nuanced things about NBA salary caps is there's a salary minimum. So, frankly, the Wizards need to spend this money somehow or another. And
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
like I'm looking at Spotrac now. Um, this is, AD and Trae Young represent, at least for next season, it's going to be 65% of the Wizards salary cap. AD
Yep.
is a player option in 26, 27. I'm sorry, no. AD's player option 27, 28. Trae Young's player option next season.
Hmm.
So yeah, it's just you have to spend the money somehow for the next season, next 2 seasons, and you still have the flexibility. It's not like bad money over the long term.
Yeah, well, the thing that also you could argue as well is Washington set themselves up to have a ton of money clearing up on the books this summer, and obviously most of that money is now gone because of these 2 moves that they've made. But that was the reason you created this type of flexibility because realistically, the NBA is different than it was 10 years ago. You and I both understand that. Free agency isn't the same, and Washington's never been a free agent destination by any stretch of the imagination as well. So if you're Washington in this situation, this was kind of always what everyone envisioned when they traded away Jordan Poole and Sadiq Bey. They knew that they made this type of move because you wanted to bring in those expiring deals in CJ McCollum and then the year before that Chris Middleton because you wanted to have the opportunity to move those guys to take in more bad contracts and acquire assets in return. However, I think the Wizards got a little bit more than they bargained for initially because they were able to acquire distressed assets who they felt like could actually help them a lot more on the floor than they expected. Maybe the initial plan was, you get somebody on a bad contract and maybe you get back a first round pick, but you don't foresee them really helping you out that much. But I feel like the Wizards, with what they've seen from their young crop of players, they were doing this without a pure point guard on the roster. The fact that they could go out and get a distressed asset and Trae Young for practically no cost, and to CJ McCollum, who's an expiring deal, then Corey Kispert, who didn't really seem like he had much of a role here in the future. And now you have a guy that can help distribute to your young players for at least the next season or so. Maybe he ends up becoming trade bait at some point, or maybe they choose to extend him because they think he has a lot of great basketball left to be played. That remains to be seen. But they've made all these moves with everything, like everything's been done with a purpose, which is the thing that's been the most refreshing to see from this front office throughout the entirety of the entire thing, or the entirety of this whole thing, is everything's being done with a purpose, and you're not kind of just making moves blindly, hoping it increases the win total by 5 the next season. That's not been the case at all.
Yeah. Yeah, and I will give a shout here to, let's see, Salad Action. Thank you for your comments. And I could see this, like I could understand this point of view where, again, the names of Trae Young and Anthony Davis, it evokes certain connotations or perceptions, like who they are and their current standing in the NBA right now. But I mean, I think a lot of things that we just mentioned, Ben, I see a bigger picture why the Wizards would entertain making these moves, and there's definitely value. Now, again, are these guys going to go win you an NBA championship next season? Absolutely not. I mean, to be just respectful about it, like they're not going to do that. But there's the ulterior motives of like what this front office obviously wants to continue to build upon. And there's something to be said. I think when you do have a roster full of rookies or younger guys, it helps for just like roster evolution. Like they need to learn how to play off like some focal point and have some focus versus, you just mentioned like having Corey Kispert, Jordan Poole's, like those are nice. I mean, they're nice rotational to replacement level players, to be honest. But like at some point you have to, like, if you're hoping that these guys that you've drafted are going to go somewhere, you're going to have to learn how to play off of like some substantial level player at some point.
And honestly, they've done this thing with veterans throughout the entirety of the process. They've had guys all 3 years. 2023, I guess you could say like Tyus Jones was in there. They still had Kuzma part of the equation. Then they bring in Jordan Poole, obviously, who played here for 2 seasons. And those guys, like, all respect to them. They were veterans. They were able to kind of resurrect their trade value a little bit, which I think was obviously the goal for this Wizards front office. But none of those guys pertained, and even CJ McCollum and Chris Middleton, none of those guys really translate to playing winning basketball unless they're in a situation that makes sense for it, because they're heavy usage players that are pretty high volume scorers. Like CJ McCollum was kind of that way. He looks great. And CJ McCollum is a really good player, can still get it done at 34 years old. But, the reason the Wizards aren't winning a lot of the games is because, like, you don't really have much flow or structure offensively when a guy like him is out there, because a lot of the possessions will be him with the ball in his hands for the majority of the possession, and then usually the shot will go up from him. He's not a guy that will distribute and play make for other players, which in turn will make you overall a little bit worse offensively. But he's putting up good numbers. He looks good while doing it, so he was able to, recuperate some of the trade value. I think that was necessary, and it makes it attractive to a team that realizes, hey, like, we have a situation where his play style actually makes sense for us. Like, he can actually help us win a lot more than he can help Washington win games right now, just because that's the situation. So Washington's been intentional with the guys they brought in, because obviously the goal for them has been to bottom out, give themselves the best opportunity possible at the lottery every single year, but have these veterans that look pretty good while doing it, so they're able to trade them for assets when the time is necessary.
Yeah. Just to round out this topic, right? So the moves have been made at this point, and yeah, more than likely when the end of the season is done, what the Wizards front office will be focusing on is the next iteration of the draft process they continue to execute year over year. How would you envision? How would you like to envision the Wizards finishing out this? You know, the metaphorical second half of the season. Mathematically, it's not really second half. We're well beyond that. But yeah, for the remainder of the season, where do you want to see the Wizards sort of focusing this roster?
Well, they just have to four in the league record wise because that'll guarantee that they can pick in the first round. Their pick right now is top eight for tech. That's been a large topic of conversation, obviously, is how do they manage that throughout the entirety of the season. It looks right now they're in a pretty good spot, second worst record in the NBA. You have a back-to-back upcoming with the Pacers, so cover your eyes if you're not a Wizards or Pacers fan, or maybe even if you're a fan of those teams, cover your eyes because those are going to be
Yeah.
probably
Now,
some downright disgusting games of basketball. But you still have your young players on this team that need the necessary reps going forward to help them take the next step in their career. Will Riley, a guy that they drafted in the first round this past year, he's come along very strong since the trade deadline. 6'10" guy, plays off the wing but can handle the basketball really well. It's opportunities for players like that to show what they're made of, to make the next strides and their development. So that's what you're really looking for here for the Wizards. More reps for Bub Carrington playing at the point. Continue to see Keyshawn George and probably more limited action than you'd expect because the Wizards have basically got to the point where their young players that are their best players right now in Sarr and George and Trae Johnson and those guys probably don't see the floor as much late in these games because it jeopardizes what they're trying to do. So it's interesting that you look at it from that dynamic, but to see those guys continue to get better, however it is possible.
absolutely. Um, so I mean, in a lot of ways, I mean, I talked about it, in the introduction. I mean, there is this sort of either secondary cloud, tangential cloud, or yeah, because of the win and loss record. I mean, this is directly like you know the Wizards being made the face of this, but tanking is at this like peak fervor of NBA conversation. We just finished up the All-Star weekend, and the commissioner of the league himself, Adam Silver, had probably some of the more explicit remarks about his view of tanking than we've seen in past seasons. Um, from a broader perspective, Wizards aside, like where do you currently lie with this whole concept of tanking, and where, like, what are the pros or the cons, or like what should the NBA be doing about this, or should they even be doing anything about it?
I think the NBA is making a way bigger deal of it than they should, nor is necessary, because this has been happening for decades and decades. This has been a part of basketball. Think about it, if you're a team like the Wizards, or even, for instance, smaller market teams, Charlotte, the Kings. If you're in a smaller market and your front office doesn't have the ability to chase big time free agents, like this is the route you have to take. Like this is what gives a fan base hope, is that you can bottom out and go through a rebuild process and then acquire rising cheap talent. That's the way that's had to be done, and I don't know why it's become such a large issue now. And I know they reference integrity of the game. I think there are other ways right now that basketball's integrity has been messed with. Obviously, sports gambling has played a big part in that. So I don't know if the Utah Jazz sitting Larry Markkinen and Jaren Jackson Jr. is the worst thing that's happened to basketball over the past couple of years. But like, I get it from a perspective where people see it as such a large problem this year specifically because there's teams with the pick protections like the Wizards, like the Jazz, and this is a loaded draft class upcoming. But where was this energy for any of the other teams that built their teams this way? This is how a lot of great teams built their squads. The Pistons are an example of a team that had to do it this way. It took a long time for the Pistons to rise to the top of the ranks in the Eastern Conference where they are right now, but they got their star player in Cade Cunningham through tanking. And a couple of years after that, they also drafted well outside of that. The Spurs, they tanked for one specific season, really, and they got the best prospect since LeBron, and now they're instantly back. They're one of the best teams in the West right now. Probably give them just as good as a chance of anybody to make a run out there in the West. Thunder did this exact. This is where the Wizards are getting the mold from. Will Dawkins, a guy that was in the OKC front office for 15 years before coming to Washington, so he gets it. Houston built its team also by kind of doing it the same way the Wizards have done it right now, building a core of players through the draft, and then they go out and acquire KD in the trade market. Like, the Wizards are kind of on a similar trajectory where they're going to start supplementing the roster with some talent through the trade. This is like how it's been done. So I don't know where the outrage was for any other teams like this doing it. And I think, all of the deliberations about them getting rid of the draft or whatever people are trying to conspirize right now, the lottery itself, the system, the NBA dug its own grave by having a system that is harmful to teams that are bad. And I know they do it because they want to incentivize teams not to tank. But how is a team like the Kings or the Jazz or even the Wizards in this sense ever supposed to get good if they can't ever get the necessary talent they need to get to the next rank in their rebuild? Because there's plenty of good players. The Wizards got Trae Johnson at 6 overall, and I think Trae Johnson is a really good player, a really buildable piece for this franchise, and he could help them become a playoff team someday. But if the Wizards got the first pick last year and got Cooper Flagg, they'd be in a much different conversation right now. They'd be a lot more competitive in the Eastern Conference. Basketball is just a sport where it matters that much more. So the fact that you have teams that are borderline playoff teams that have gotten the first pick the past couple of years, like, it's a reflection of how poor the system that's currently in place is, and teams are just doing what is necessary. Like, I don't really fault the teams for taking what they feel like are the necessary steps to try to become a good team. This is what teams have to do to get good. Does the league not want teams to become good? Like, that's kind of what I look at it as.
Yeah. When I reviewed Adam Silver's All-Star Weekend comments again, I find that the operative word in his comments and he hit on it multiple times, and it's a 4-minute clip. I just dropped the link to it. Hat tip to awful announcing on that. Over and over, Adam Silver talked about incentives, and also then by proxy, sort of oscillating around that word, right? Like, talk about misalignment of incentives right now about the draft, lottery, and all these things. And I suppose, like, if there were to be anything done about it, it's maybe like Adam Silver, like, there's a hope that, like, he can think about it rationally, because that's what I guess if there were to be a view that there's a problem with the draft lottery and the tanking thing, it's that the incentive right now, which I don't hold judgment on, is if you are not the Lakers or either New York team or Miami, you need to tank more than likely if you want top talent to change the fortunes of your franchise, because those are the only markets that are really going to acquire top talent independent of the NBA draft, and history's just proven that at this point. So yeah, the incentive right now is if I'm a quote unquote small market team, I probably should lose at some point to reset and get that top talent out of the draft. Otherwise, I'm going to be like a mediocre team like the Chicago Bulls. Disclosure, I am a Chicago Bulls fan, but I'm just gonna be honest. Like, the Bulls haven't prioritized draft talent ever. Even they got lucky with Derrick Rose, and we saw what that did for that franchise's fortunes for a solid 4 or 5 seasons. Where, like, and then also getting lucky with Jimmy Butler. Like, the draft is where it matters for the vast majority of this league. So if the NBA has a problem with the current system, yeah, and the incentives perhaps, like, incentivize teams to win games and at the same time still have access to top draft talent. Like, it's in some way, whatever the details are, figure them out. I probably lean in the mindset of, like, if the NBA would change anything, Am Silver loves all these tournaments, create a draft lottery tournament instead of this playing tournament. Like, that would be my thought.
Yeah, and just, like, think about it. Like, there's nowhere worse to be in the NBA than the middle. And Silver acknowledged that. Like, he understands that teams don't want to be mediocre because realistically, even if you make the playing game, you're not winning. You know what? Like, you're not going to win anything. And the Wizards learned that the hard way. And I think it's interesting every year that you have the the Heat, the Bulls, and the Hawks competing for the play in every single year in the East, and none of those teams are ever going to actually amount to anything from that situation. And if you're a team like the Wizards, it's interesting to me because I've had fans of other teams, the Bulls included, in my mention saying, I wish I had a front office. Like, I wish my team's front office uh, managed stuff the way the Wizards did because I'm tired of being stuck in the middle. Like, I'm tired of operating with no foresight going forward. That's just the way it is. Like, you have to build your team for the future by managing your assets and acquiring top tier talent on the cheap. And the way to do that is through the draft. Like, this is a system that has made sense throughout like every single sport for years. Like, this is how it happens in the NFL. There's no issues, and it's obviously very different. You can't compare apples to oranges because there's 5 players on the floor versus 11 on the field and then 11 on the other side of the ball. So, like, yeah, I get it. It's not the same thing unless you're going for a quarterback or whatever in football. But this is the system. Players have to be drafted to the situation that drafts them, and teams, this is how smaller market teams will operate. This is how they get good. And if they want to get rid of that system, then I don't know. That'll just seem like the death of a lot of teams to me.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like it's the optimal direction for the league to take, especially given all the goodwill that really has been invested in expanding this league over the last, say like 25 years. I mean, the amount of expansions having expansions on the table again. Are you really going to expand this league and then at the same time potentially disrupt the whole distribution of talent across the league? Like if it becomes something like where it's Major League Baseball basically, and all the stars are just going to go to like 4 or 5 teams religiously every single season, like it just I can't say that I would be excited about that as an NBA fan, seeing the league go in that direction.
And it would matter so much in basketball. And we saw this era before the CJ McCollum NBA that exists now, where there's a bit more parity and you see different champions every single year. We saw what happened where we saw the same NBA finals for 3 years in a row. We saw Golden State build the greatest, arguably one of the greatest basketball teams. I know you're a Bulls fan, so I'll throw you the bone right there. But one of the greatest basketball teams ever was built through a super team and in a big move in free agency to do so. The NBA has tried to move past that era where teams can build their franchises that way, where the rich get richer, whatever, the poor get poorer in this situation. But in baseball, like where you see it, like the Yankees or the Dodgers getting everybody, and it happens. And I've always been under the impression baseball, like, is such a team-oriented sport. Like, one star doesn't make as big of a difference as one star does in basketball. But the Dodgers have won back-to-back World Series titles because they're just that good. They are just that good. So it definitely makes a difference. But it'd be so much more catastrophic, I think, if the NBA operated like that. If you saw the Knicks and the Lakers in the championship every single year, like just with young talent oozing all over the place every single year, year after year, then they acquire the young up-and-coming talent from other teams. Like, it'd just be a system that'd be bad, and I think it'd make people less interested in the game than they are with this whatever tanking that it has them uninterested in it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you just the mathematics of it. I mean, there are 5 players in NBA on the floor of an NBA game at any time versus 9 in Major League Baseball. I guess 22 if we're talking NFL football. Like, it just, there's an outsized impact of disrupting like how that talent is distributed in the NBA.
Yeah, it's just it's so hard for the league to come up with like a good solution to all this stuff. Like, I can admit that. I can see where the league is coming from, where they don't want teams purposely throwing games the way they have, but I just don't know what the fix is, and I don't think getting rid of an NBA draft process is remotely close to the right fix. I think the lottery that's in place right now with the flattened odds has just it's hurt teams that are bad that have tried to go through this rebuilding process. So that's where I look at it.
Yeah, yeah, certainly. It's a complicated problem if one considers it a problem. I believe even more complicated is actually trying to come up with a solution for this. So I don't know, but hopefully for Wizards fans, at least given the moves that the franchise is making, maybe it's a moot point in another 2 or 3 seasons anyway for at least for you guys.
It's become a little bit tiresome, but like you're finally starting to feel like you're on the other side of it. So that's what you have to look forward to right now if you're a Wizards fan.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, and to like delve into more, optimistic, positive things. I mean, let's talk about like some of the players that likely should, you know, the hope being fuel that getting rising from the bottoming out of era of Wizards basketball into higher expectations, higher accomplishments. Let's talk first about like I want to talk about Alex Sarr. He's in his sophomore season right now, and maybe like to some degree in these final stretches of the season, maybe there's less of him we're seeing on the floor. But what have you thought about him in going into the sophomore season, in like in terms of like progress he's making or things that you want to see him still grow and develop in? Where are you with Alex Sarr?
It's been a revelation, I think, to this Wizards rebuild that he's had the jump he's had in his second season. Because year one of Alex Sarr, while there were some flashes, he lacked physicality, he lacked aggression, he lacked the ability to go up strong and finish at the rim. And he's really ironed out a lot of those things here in his second year. He has polished his game a whole lot offensively to the point where he almost looks unrecognizable as an offensive player from his first year. The defense has spoke for itself since his rookie year. He was great protecting the rim, but another element to his game defensively that they love and it stands out is his switchability. He's a guy that can get out there on the perimeter because of his athleticism, his reach with his wingspan. He can be a real asset to a defense, and there's a reason he was leading the league in blocks for a good portion of the season while Wemby wasn't qualifying at the time. Sarr is that good at defending the rim, and he's had to defend more shots at the rim than anybody in the league because the Wizards are just a poor defensive team right now. But what he's been able to do in his second season, just from, first of all, the shot diet has changed completely. There was a lot of fading away from the basket, looks from the outside for Sarr in his rookie season. In his second year, he has completely cleaned that up. He has already taken, I believe, 30 more total shots from less than 5 feet away from the rim this year than he did in the entirety of last year in 67 games played. So that's a big improvement. He's scoring at a higher efficiency at around the rim. I think he's 70% from the field from looks that are 5 feet or less from the rim. And he's added some more post work to his game, which I think has been a nice touch for him. I think he's going to continue to improve offensively, but I love what he brings as a dynamic, working out of the pick and roll, passing out of the short roll. I think is really good. He looks like a true guy that could develop into like your second tier star player for this team. And I think he'll be an all-star at some point in the next 2 years.
Yeah. And really, the presence of Alex Sarr, that by itself is what makes the trade deadline moves we talked about earlier, bringing Trae Young and Anthony Davis, those three together on the court. I am real curious to see what that's going to look like, because I mean you can have your feelings or whatever about Anthony Davis's health. When he's on the floor, like there's no question, like he's going to impact the defense. And so like that tandem on switches, that will be interesting to see. And then also how that benefits Trae Young, quite frankly, because I mean we all know Trae Young is a defensive liability. That's just what it is at this point. So at least Trae Young now having either coming, helping, like frankly having those two guys there to potentially like hide him once and for all in defense instead of getting exposed, like that could be an interesting dynamic to see next season with those three.
Yeah, and you hope that the back line of Davis and Sarr is good enough to mask that deficiency that you bring up there. And hopefully those guys anchoring the rim and the painted area will make the guys on the wing a lot better. You still have pretty formidable perimeter defenders in Keyshawn George, who looks great as a two-way guy, who's developed a lot here in his second season. Bilal Coulibaly, known defensive stopper for this team. They also drafted a guy in the second round last year, Jameer Watkins. That's looked like a really good perimeter defender for this team. If everybody else can pick up the pieces, I think you can get by with what you're losing having Young on the floor, but you also just hope that you're getting a net positive out of Young because what he's going to bring to the table is a playmaker working out of a pick and roll with Sarr or Anthony Davis or setting up Trae Johnson in the corner for a three or setting up Keyshawn George. That's where you hope you get the net positive and everything else can hopefully pick up the pieces to mask that deficiency a little bit.
Yeah, it's a challenging thing about Trae Young because I mean it's never been a concern or question about like what does Trae Young do offensively because that's always been fairly consistent. The problem is just like he is such a huge drag on the defensive side of the court. It really offsets any positive offensive creation he's generating for you on the floor. I mean, to put it in perspective, shout out everybody's favorite numbers app, besides Basketball Reference. I mean, Data Baller, I find I use them a lot more and more. Um, in terms of creation abilities, I'll put in perspective of just like for this season, what he's been doing with his offensive Darko numbers versus the defensive Darko numbers. I look into the details behind it, but I mean to put it in perspective, Trae Young's a +3 on offensive Darko, but a -2.4 in defensive Darko. So it turns Trae Young into like a person who should really be considered a top tier player in the NBA. It turns him to an average guy because like everything he's putting on the court in terms of his offense, whether between the playmaking and the shooting or the scoring, really is offset by just like not being able to defend at all. And I want to give credit to Atlanta Hawks because I thought they did a noble effort, honestly, in their roster construction to at least try to surround Trae Young with a lot of size and length, right, to see like if they can make it work. And obviously it didn't pan out, but I think that has to be a wake-up call for Trae too. Like now in Washington, that like he has to at least be present on some level in his defense. Like nobody's asking him to lock down guys, but he's just got to be able to like not be a net black hole for his team on defense.
Well, they demand effort and intensity. So if that's the expectation, then hopefully that's what you get of Trae Young. And for a guy at his size, like there's probably always so much he can do for you defensively. But if he at least puts in the effort and hauls ass on that end, then maybe you can get out a little bit more of a net positive than you would imagine for the guy. That's been the expectation. They've had situations this year where players have been taken off the floor because they didn't feel like they were getting the proper effort defensively. There was a situation before Cam Whitmore unfortunately had a blood clot in his right shoulder, and he's now out for the rest of the season where he was benched because they didn't feel like he was giving the proper effort that he needed in transition defensively. And they take a lot of pride in defense, the organization does. Trae Johnson, the guy they drafted 6 overall, Will Dawkins, in one of the film sessions they did in the private workout with Trae, they showed him all of his tape where they felt like he was taking the play off defensively and said, like, this doesn't fly in our organization. So they used that as motivating factors. And if Trae Young is truly bought in the way he's made the perception look like he is, the energy he's brought on the bench, wearing the DC Legends jerseys and stuff, trying to acclimate himself to the city, then hopefully he'll be bought into that mentality because they want to be an organization that takes pride in defense. Whether they're going to have the horses to be a very good defensive team or not remains to be seen, but the effort's going to have to be there.
Absolutely. I mean, it really is. As much as people say the NBA is a copycat league, that seems to be the blueprint that most of the turnaround stories are following. Is like they get serious about their defense, and everything sort of seems to flow from there. I mean, Indiana Pacers are probably most prominent, going from like a nice, fun, fast team to like they bought into defense and went to the NBA Finals. Could have potentially won an NBA championship if not for like a torn Achilles from Trae Young. I mean, sorry, Tyrese Halliburton, not Trae Young, but yeah. And then the same thing with like Houston in the West. Like they, it's been an up and down season, but just even like being a more respected franchise and not just being viewed as a young, fun team. Like that came from just Ime Udoka drilling defense into the expectations of that roster, and then also the Pistons being on top of the East the entire season with a legitimate, to me, finals contending defense.
You got to build your defense the right way. It's important, and you got to have your defensive stoppers. And everybody's got to be on the same page. That's why OKC is the best team in the NBA. They have the best defensive rating, best offensive rating. So it just makes sense that they're going to be the best team in the league. And you saw it on display in the finals. And those great games between Indiana and OKC were just featured so heavily with great defensive play. And Dort came up massive in Game 7 of that series. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, the MVP, he's an excellent defender as well. He showcased that all series long. You love what Chet brings to the table. Championship caliber teams have really good defenders. You got to be able to get it done offensively, but when it comes down to it, if you need a stop, you got to have the horses to get the stop.
Yeah, stops. Yeah, to me that's one of the most important things about NBA defense. To get the stop. There's other sort of immeasurable aspects of it, but the stop aspect of it, to me, that's just that's where the rubber meets the road. Can you get stops?
It's the most important part of the game. You're like, can you do it? The Wizards right now barely get stops, so that's why they lose a lot.
Yeah. Another young focal point, or what I would assume the Wizards are viewing is a long-term core building block, right? Is Trae. So many Traes in the league. Not Trae Young, of course, but Trae Johnson.
Yep.
His rookie campaign. How would you like? What are your notes on what he's done as a rookie so far for the Wizards?
Say pretty as advertised, if not even a little better. He's had the injury stuff with the hip flex early in the season that plagued him a little bit. But when they've gotten the offense involved, where they set him pin downs, actually facilitate the offense around getting him open looks, he looks like a guy that's the second best shooter right now in that rookie class behind Con Knipple for good reason. He's a guy that can fill in the stat sheet every single night because of his ability to stretch the floor and just get it done from the outside. To do what he's done in his rookie season, shooting close to 40% from three, I think is pretty impressive stuff. And he's some decent level of ability with on-ball creation. I think he's going to have to improve a little bit more upon that as the season goes along. But that's kind of what this second half of the season is for here. Like, give him those opportunities on the basketball to see how he can score at all three levels. Because I think he's going to be a guy in term for the majority of his career will be capable of those things. Right now, he's mostly a shooter, but I think he's shown me some flashes that he can be a lot more than that, and he looks like a real buildable piece for this team.
Yeah, certainly. And then you mentioned him before a bit, but this seems to be like evolving into a nice development story for the Wizards. I mean, Keyshawn George as well. He's been a mainstay in the rotation this season, right?
Yeah, and he's had to play on the ball. He's had to be this team's point guard in a lot of different situations, which I don't think was necessarily expected for him early on, but maybe it's been for the better because he's developed his game so much offensively. He's basically doubled his numbers in almost every statistical category. So you got to give a lot of credit to the work that he put in this summer. He was dominant in the AmeriCup this past summer as well. So there was kind of an expectation that you might see a breakout for him in year number 2, but it's looked really good for George. Him playing on the basketball, just the ability to break down the defense, get into the mid-range area, use his shoulder, create a little bit of separation, operate in the mid-range. It's been really impressive stuff, and he's an underrated playmaker as well. He looks like a guy that can help you out a lot on both ends of the floor, and he looks like a piece to me.
Yeah, I mean, that helps certainly. I mean, we talk about like the Wizards exiting that deconstruction phase and now going into a period where obviously they're trying to build something that's better than bottom of the conference type performance. So yeah, you need to hit on some of those kind of players as well, because I mean those become good margin wins for you. Whereas like if you can get that kind of output for somebody who development or G League, two-way, whatever. Like that's high impact at a low cost. So on the subject of cost, and this is a good way I want to round out the conversation for us tonight also. So a lot of big moves have been made now for really going back to last off season with with this roster now. I imagine the Wizards front office, they have some sort of timeline or horizon in mind for how they're navigating the extension landscape, because they have multiple players that are coming up as extension eligible extension eligible this season going into the off season. So I just want to name off a few of them. I'd love to get your thoughts on like, should the Wizards be interested in extension? If so, like what's the right value that the Wizards should be targeting for some of these players? First one that comes to mind, Bilal Koulibaly, who you mentioned, yeah, defensive stopper. Like, is he somebody that the Wizards should be looking at extending?
I think the Wizards will. I don't know if everyone will be super thrilled about that because he hasn't shown a lot offensively through the first 3 years of his career, but he undeniably has a role in this team because of what he can do defensively, and I think he's proven that on multiple occasions through the first 3 years. And health has been an issue for him. Like he just hasn't had the ability to stay on the floor for long periods of time, which has made it hard for him to get in rhythm offensively. So I look at it from that. If I'm looking at an extension for him, I think it'd be relatively cheap. I don't think he's really done much to warrant like asking for a big time contract, but yeah, like he'd be a guy that I think the Wizards should be interested in having around for this team trying to take the next step in the rebuild. We talked about defense. You need guys that can get stops. Like he is one of those players, and he's been one of the few guys that you've been able to rely on to get stops. So if that's what you prioritize as an organization, I think they'll act upon that, and I think they'll probably get this deal done for relatively cheap.
Yeah, and certainly, I mean, the tide has changed so much. I feel like in the NBA, where like defense matters again, and like the era of just being like, uh, you could just be a scorer and you don't have to worry about defense. I think that's long gone. So at least being able to play defense will keep you on the floor, and maybe it's not going to be like the biggest bag in the world to give, but he should at least get a respectable extension. I would hope, just for what he's able to do as a defender.
Yeah, that's what you need. And in terms of like his extension, like talks and the way people perceive them because of his offensive play, like I put that to the side because I think he's the guy that would benefit more from playing with a really good offensive group around him, where you have him doing less with the basketball in his hands. Like I just don't think he's the guy that can really create for himself or really generate his own shot. He's got a good first step. He's got good athleticism, but he's not a great ball handler, and he's really struggled to shoot the three ball. That's gotten worse and worse each year of his career. But maybe if you have him in an offensive system where you can have him move off the ball and have somebody like Trae Young distribute for him, get him open cuts to the basket, he's athletic and he can jump out the gym. So maybe that'll be where he's best suited offensively as well. And like if he becomes a guy that comes off your bench and gives you those 15 to 20 minutes of hard defense every single night, 8 to 10 points, you can live with that. Like that's a piece that you need.
Yeah, I mean there's certainly a place for that kind of player, and even perhaps if it's beyond his time in Washington, I mean contenders time and time again look for that sort of player in like a mid rotation spot, or sometimes like just that ace up the sleeve of like, can I get you in here for like 10 minutes and really just blow up stuff and keep our lead.
Everyone needs one like that. I think that's been the bottom line that I've learned over watching the league the past couple of years.
Yeah, 100%. You mentioned, I mean, so the other player that comes to mind too on the extension outlook for the Wizards, you mentioned his health. Unfortunately, he's out for the season, and in some ways, like I thought it was an interesting flyer for the Wizards to take on him. But Cam Whitmore, like, is he someone that the Wizards will consider extending, or like is it potentially not in the cards for him because of the health concerns?
I doubt the extension's in the cards because of the health, and they'll probably just need to see more. They didn't really ever get to see a whole lot of him. I don't think he even touched 30 minutes in a game at one point this season. He was kind of finding his way within the rotation, getting used to the Wizards system, and it just never really happened for the guy because the injury, unfortunately, and then the benching that happened before he ended up getting injured. So that aspect of it was unfortunate for him, and I think he'll get another chance to play with this young group of players. Like he's going to be 22 next year, and he's freakishly athletic. He showed some flash for these guys, especially on what he does offensively. It'll be like a sink or swim type of situation, I think, for Cam. Like he's still playing in his hometown. He's going to get his health in check first, obviously, and see where it goes from there. But I doubt an extension would be in the cards.
Yeah, and so yeah, more than likely, like he probably goes into the 26-27 season, playing out the final year of his rookie contract, and then he would be up for restricted free agency the summer of 2027. So, yeah,
Yep.
that seems logical to me.
Yep.
Yeah, and then the other two extension candidates really technically, yeah, I believe like the Wizards could extend Trae Young now.
Yeah.
And I would assume if there's a reasonable price to be met between the two sides of the party, maybe like I would assume the Wizards would want to do that, right? I mean, he's
I
obviously
think
a big get.
Yeah, I think a Young extension is pretty likely. I think at some point it just seems like it makes sense for both sides to get that deal done. I think that's what he wants. And I think the organization wants to put their stamp around the league, saying that they even have the ability to get this type of deal done. Like, because this is Trae Young's preferred destination, it'd almost be sending a message to the league saying, like, we were someone's preferred trade destination and, like, they want to be with us for the foreseeable future. Get that deal done, and then hopefully you get what you get out of him as your lead distributor. Like, you're not asking Trae Young to be the superstar of this team. Like, maybe he's the best player when he first starts playing. That'd make a lot of sense. Like, this guy was an all-NBA player, 27 years old, but down the road, 2 to 3 years from now, like, you don't want him to be your best player. Like, you'd probably be in a similar spot that you're in right now, or just mediocre at best. You just want him to help mold everybody into becoming a better player, and then have him do what he does as well. So I think an extension for Trae Young makes sense.
Yeah, and then the other side of the trade deadline sort of jackpot is Anthony Davis going into this summer. It appears that he'll be extension eligible. Also, that one I would assume is perhaps a little more tricky, just given he makes he is the biggest salary on the books now at this point. Wizards have him potentially for one more year. I suppose it depends on how AD feels about his player option, and I suppose like if he didn't see an extension coming, he's definitely certain to opt into his option for the 27-28 year, which is $62 million. So I mean, should the Wizards be looking at extension, assuming like there's a price to be met there between the two sides?
I think no. I don't really think that's what I would hope for at this point. Like, it's just seems kind of like an unreliable investment right now, and I feel like AD is someone that you could have become trade bait for you at some point if necessary, because like you don't see him as like the end game piece that this Wizards team needed to make, but like still certainly can be a really good player. Like, he averaged 21 and 11 in the games where he was actually healthy this year. So the dude can go out there and still play. We know that. And he could become a valuable asset for this team if they decide to move on from him at some point, or use him to make an even bigger move at some point down the road, a year and a half or 2 years from now or whatever. So I think if you extend him, you're taking yourself kind of out of that ability, the flexibility that you might have with a guy that become on a player option after next season. So I don't know if it'd make a lot of sense. I know his agent, Rich Paul, like wants an extension. That's something they've talked about for a while in Dallas, but I don't know. I see Washington has been a pretty savvy front office and has always managed their books pretty well since they've taken over. So I don't see them doing something that will jeopardize their financial situation for years to come. So we'll see.
Yeah. And certainly, I mean, going into next season, $62 million sounds like a great, first or second apron escape hatch for a team that's looking for a way out of those aprons. So, I would expect either basketball reasons or just the finances behind this contract. Like, there should be a market for a trade market for Anthony Davis if the Wizards choose to pursue that.
Yeah, that's what it seems like to me. I think you get what you need out of him as a player. He can help transform you a little bit, and if there's value there and somebody wants to go out there and get him, they think that that's the piece they need to win a championship, and they want to give up assets for him, then you probably make the move.
Yeah, 100%. Well, yeah, it's going to be an interesting balance of the rest of this regular season, and then I am like deeply curious about the moves that the Wizards will make in the offseason, because it seems that with each transaction cycle, the Wizards are being active and they're doing things that really have changed, at least where we stand today, it's changed the reputation that they've had traditionally as being kind of this, like you said, like organization that's like completely comfortable and willing to tolerate mediocrity and just do like weird things, frankly, as a front office that keep them entrenched in mediocre ways.
Yeah, they're just gonna have to start winning. Once you actually start winning games and making yourself known as a team that could actually be a legitimate threat in the Eastern Conference, that's when you get the respect that you're trying to command here at this point. So the Wizards can do everything that they've done on paper, and it looks great, and a lot of people love it. But if it never leads to them winning anything, then at the end of the day, then it was just moves. So
Yeah,
they're gonna have to start winning the games.
absolutely. Well, Ben, really appreciate having you on tonight. Before we get out of here, definitely want to give you some opportunity here just to plug, your coverage, anything you're working on that people should know about.
Yeah, just every single day with the Locked On Wizards podcast. You can get that wherever you get your podcasts. You can just check me out on my socials as well. That's Strober Sports.
Appreciate it. And I will once again remind everybody, if you like what we did here, please actually like this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and now also follow us on Twitch. We're going live tonight on YouTube and Twitch. Appreciate the comments. Thank everybody that sat in, engaged, and yeah, keep rocking with us at Narratives Per Possession. We are here to connect you to better basketball narratives. So with that, I am Mo. Thank you again, Ben, and definitely love to have you back to talk more. Again, I expect probably like draft time
Yeah,
or
yeah,
some of the off season moves.
definitely. Thank you, Bo.
All right, man. Take care.